All right. The Rules Committee will come to order. Today, we are considering three measures to ensure that our government can best serve the American public. First is H.R. 2988, the Whistleblower Protection Improvement Act, to expand protections for federal whistleblowers. Nobody should be able to interfere with or retaliate against courageous public servants who expose cases of wrongdoing. Not senior-level agency employees, not administration officials, not the president, no one. Strengthening the rights of whistleblowers will only foster greater trust in our governmental system and encourage accountability for cases of waste, fraud, and abuse. Second is H.R. 302, the Preventing Patronage System Act. President Trump issued an executive order in 2020 to restructure the federal workforce, making it easier for the government to fire thousands of federal workers while allowing political and other considerations to affect hiring. In short, President Trump wanted to be able to fire highly qualified expert employees and replace them with political loyalists. We are talking about federal workers that protect our national security, help families in the wake of natural disasters, and research treatments for the deadliest diseases. These are dedicated, apolitical employees with years of practical knowledge under their belts, and it is invaluable that they stay on the job and continue to do a good job. Though President Biden overturned this dangerous order, Congress must take action to prevent future presidents from attacking the independence and integrity of civil service. Finally, we will consider H.R. 8326, the Insuring a Fair and Accurate Census Act. The United States Census is fundamental to American democracy, informing how federal dollars are allocated and congressional seats are apportioned. Our communities rely on a fair and accurate census, free from partisan interference and manipulation. This bill responds to the political interference seen during the 2020 count by maintaining operational fidelity and enhancing the institutional independence of the Census Bureau and its operations over time. These three measures are critical to ensure a more ethical, efficient, and representative government. Each is sensible and straightforward and should be able to earn widespread support. And now let me turn this over to our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Cole, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Today's hearing covers three items, all of which were reported out of the Committee on Oversight and Reform. Collectively, in my view, these bills represent bad ideas and bad policy being pushed by the majority at the expense of the American people. The first of these I'll discuss is H.R. 302. It prohibits the President from placing civil service positions in the accepted service unless these jobs were on Schedule A through E, as were in effect on September 30th, 2020. Republicans on the Oversight and Reform Committee have expressed concerns with these bills because it would effectively eliminate the ability of future presidents to establish new categories of accepted service positions, which would freeze into place the existing schedules. This would limit the president's authority over the executive branch, make it harder for the president to be effective in making policy changes, and would make it difficult to discipline or terminate civil servants in policymaking roles for poor performance or insubordination. While I believe strongly in the need for a well-structured civil service and the need for civil service protections, and I'm strongly supportive of the federal workforce, I understand concerns that a blanket ban on adding new categories of accepted service positions may ultimately harm the institutions this bill is purportedly trying to protect. I look forward to a robust discussion on this bill today. The second item I'll discuss is H.R. 2988. It would make extensive changes to existing whistleblower protections for federal employees and would essentially grant a presumption of entitlement to any employee who claims whistleblower status. H.R. 2988 is, in many ways, a solution in search of a problem. While there are already many existing and bipartisan protections for whistleblowers in federal law, there's no evidence that the extensive changes envisioned in this bill are necessary. The bill would impose serious restraints on the executive branch, preventing them from managing or disciplining bad-acting employees who claim whistleblower status to protect their positions. It also assumes that everyone who claims whistleblower status is a good actor, when the reality that we all know is that there are unscrupulous individuals who would claim this status knowing full well that they are bad actors. While the true bona fide whistleblowers should be protected from retaliation, this bill would extend those protections much further than is necessary and would effectively prevent disciplinary action for those acting in bad faith. Such a state of affairs would be bad for the civil service, bad for the executive branch, and ultimately bad for the nation. Finally, our last bill, H.R. 8326, is deeply misguided. H.R. 8326 would make several changes to the Census Bureau and to the decennial census process. It would vest the director with unprecedented power and authority to make all operational, statistical, or technical decisions for decennial census, while at the same time eliminating existing presidential authority and control over the Census Bureau. The bill would also restrain the Bureau from asking important questions on decennial census, such as the question of citizenship. The decennial census is a constitutional duty of the executive branch, providing critical information for the government on the American people as a whole, and informing duties like redistricting. Vesting control of this important process in an unelected bureaucrat, making it nearly impossible for the president to overrule the director or replace the director for cause, and preventing the Census Bureau from asking critically important questions about the American people are all a recipe for disaster. I urge the majority to rethink this misguided piece of legislation. Mr. Chairman, today's agenda makes clear that this week will be yet another lost week for the House of Representatives, as we do nothing to advance the real interests of the American people. We face a deadline at the end of the month to keep the government open and operating. The crisis at our southern border continues unabated, and the American people continue to suffer under the weight of the heavy inflation and economic recession caused by the majority's reckless policies. We could and should be taking steps this week to address these issues. Instead, the majority is having us spend time on 3 bills that won't go anywhere and won't become law. This is hardly the best use of the people's time, Mr. Chairman, and I hope we'll do things differently in the coming weeks. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member yields back his time. I now would like to welcome our witnesses to provide testimony on H.R. 302, Preventing a Patronage System Act of 2021, H.R. 2988, the Whistleblower Protection Improvement Act of 2021, and H.R. 8326, Ensuring a Fair and Accurate Census Act. Chairwoman Maloney, Ranking Member Comer, we are delighted that you are here. I now recognize the gentleman from New York, Chairwoman Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member. First, I'd like to compliment you on your artwork. It's the most original and best I've seen in any room. It's usually just speaks to the former chairman, but you seem to be speaking to American values and goals and really challenges that we've faced as a nation. And I believe that these 3 bills are very important bills for our freedom, for our democracy, and preserving the rights of our people and accountability of government to people. The first, the H.R. 302, Preventing a Patronage System Act. It is a bipartisan bill, and it was introduced by Representative Conley, Chairman of the Government Operations Subcommittee, and reported by the Oversight Committee out on May of 2021. You may recall that in October of 2020, the prior administration issued an executive order creating a new accepted service schedule called Schedule F. Under the order, agencies were directed to identify civil service positions with a policy-making function to convert to Schedule F, which would strip the civil service employees of their workplace protections and make it easier to remove them from their jobs if they did not comply with the administration's political agenda, not policy agenda, political agenda. Presumably, these positions could then be filled with people who would be more loyal to the administration. Thankfully, President Biden revoked the executive order before it went into effect, but the order still sent shockwaves throughout the federal workforce, and some agencies had already started the process of compiling their list of positions to convert to Schedule F. This history is important to remember because there are some who want to pick up where the revoked executive order left off and codify this assault on the civil service program of our country. But Americans depend on civil servants throughout every administration. Civil servants are not partisan. They do their jobs impartially and are guided by their expertise, not by pressure to bend to the political whims of the president or whoever is in office, but to do the job of the American people. Congress must firmly assert that no president can unilaterally make such a dramatic change to the civil service schedule by executive fiat. And that's what H.R. 302 does. It was executive fiat. It did not go through the Congress. It was an executive fiat. The bill prohibits reclassification of federal employees in the competitive, nonpartisan civil service, service to our nation, to any newly created accepted services schedule. I commend the Biden administration for its unequivocal support for federal workers and the American people and the impartial, honest work of civil servants in a bipartisan, nonpartisan way for the American people. We cannot allow policies as misguided as Schedule F to reemerge, and that is why it is vital that we bring the Preventing a Patronage System Act to the floor and pass it. And those of us who have studied history know that's why the civil service law went into effect anyway. It was to prevent political patronage. We certainly do not want to bring it back. And I feel strongly about the bill, and I think it's a very good bill. I am also here to testify in strong support of H.R. 2988, the Whistleblower Protection Improvement Act. This bipartisan bill would strengthen protections for federal employees who expose wrongdoing. It is the first significant update to whistleblower protections in a decade. And I want to put into the record a listing of over 100 organizations that have come out in support of it. And to note that historically, whistleblower protection laws have always been bipartisan. It serves the American goal of identifying wrongdoing.
Without objection.
Whistleblowers play a very important role in holding our government accountable by providing critical information on government corruption and wrongdoing, including by providing information to Congress. Whistleblowers' disclosures protect taxpayers' dollars, improve federal programs. They even save lives. I introduced this bill with bipartisan support last year, passed legislation enhancing whistleblower protections against retaliation, have received strong bipartisan support over the years, and have historically passed Congress with unanimous support. The Oversight Committee has seen too many examples of employers retaliating against whistleblowers. And in one instance, we just remembered 9/11 and the planes and the deaths there. In this case, a whistleblower, the TSA moved an airport employee hundreds of miles away to a new duty station when they revealed security flaws at the TSA. I mean, we all created the TSA in a bipartisan way to protect the lives of the American people. A whistleblower showed ways it was weakened or was being not used properly, or lives were at threat, and they were penalized. I want to also say the board that oversees whistleblowers, they haven't had a quorum in about 6 years. So no whistleblower complaint has been able to move forward. This Whistleblower Protection Improvement Act would prohibit agencies from launching retaliatory investigations against employees who blow the whistle, and would limit the public disclosure of a whistleblower's identity. The bill would also provide federal whistleblowers with faster legal recourse for retaliation claims, and would allow whistleblowers to have their claims tried before a jury in federal district court. Because now, whistleblowers, they may come to your office or mine. Some have waited for 5 years, 6 years, and their complaints or whatever has not been heard. Access to jury trials has been a longtime priority of whistleblower advocates, and it would give them, federal employees, the same protection that the private sector has for whistleblowers, the right to go into court. The bill would clarify that whistleblowers who prevail are entitled to recover attorney's fees and to receive the necessary relief to make them whole. The Whistleblower Protection Improvement Act has received public support from more than 100 stakeholder organizations, including the Government Accountability Project, the National Taxpayers Union, the Project on Government Oversight, the Taxpayer Protection Alliance, the Whistleblowers of America. These groups noted that this bipartisan bill is, quote, landmark legislation, both for freedom of speech and government accountability, and, quote, would upgrade the rights of federal employees who blow the whistle to match those available for the private sector. Finally, I would like to address another incredibly important bill that should be bipartisan, and that is ensuring a fair and accurate census. I know that many of my Republican colleagues have complained that the last census had an undercount of minorities, but this was because a citizenship question was added which frightened minorities in both urban and rural areas so that they did not participate in the census. The decennial census is a critical part of our democracy. In fact, it's one of the few responsibilities of government that is mentioned in the Constitution of our country. And the results of the census determine the apportionment, not only for the House of Representatives, our representation in our legislative districts, but also the distribution of well over $1.5 trillion in federal funds and key decisions in public and private sector investments. And I would say if our data is not correct, our policies are not correct. And the census is used, we do it every 10 years, and it is used by industry, by everyone, government, to project and to plan for our country. And it is critical that the census count is complete and accurate. My bill, the Ensuring the Fair and Accurate Census Count, would help us do that. This bill is informed by the Oversight Committee's multi-year investigation into political interference by the previous administration during the 2020 census, including the effort to add a citizenship question despite strong opposition from expert statisticians, demographers, the experts at the Census Bureau. In fact, the Census Bureau's top data scientist warned about the citizenship question, quote, that it harms the quality of the census count. In a rare case, the Supreme Court sided really with a lawsuit that was filed by Democrats. It should have been filed by Republicans and Democrats, but they ultimately blocked and threw out the citizenship question, saying that the rationale for adding it seems, quote, to have been contrived. We know that from research from our committee and also research from others that a Mr. Hoffler wrote a memo. He was called the Michelangelo of gerrymandering. And he said the way to preserve, paraphrasing him, a Republican majority is to have a citizenship question that then would not count all of our citizens, and it would help. He wrote it out. This was reported. I'd like to put the article into the record so that people can see this incredible article from the New York Times that revealed his strategy to put a citizenship question, which was almost sickening to me, is that he framed it as a civil rights issue, that this was supposed to help voting rights, yet the real motive was to take voting rights and representation away from segments of our society, particularly immigrants. The previous administration took other steps that risked undermining the independent, nonpartisan nature of the census. They appointed an unprecedented 8 political appointees where they were previously limited to 3. And these were big employees. These were not secretaries. These were strategists. These were major leaders in demography and statistics and census work. And they tried to rush the processing of the census data despite repeated warnings from the career staff that this could compromise the integrity of the census count. Partisan manipulation in the census by Democrats or Republicans is just plain wrong and hurts our country. And what I think is so interesting now in this debate is that it is Republicans that are complaining to me about the census count and the undercount, because the citizenship question drove down the count in the rural districts particularly, which is one of the hardest areas to count, and many Republicans represent rural districts. My bill would protect the census and ensure that this cannot happen again, regardless of which party is in power. The legislation would vest key decision-making authority over the census in the census director, who happens to be a political appointee, and would limit the number of political appointees within the Bureau to no more than 4. You can't load it up. You can have 4, which is consistent with historical precedent. We all understand that presidents have prerogatives to make political appointees, but they cannot dominate and run an agency. It would also require new questions to be thoroughly researched and analyzed and certified by the Secretary of Commerce, evaluated by the GAO, and shared with Congress, with Republicans and Democrats, so that we can say that this is not a partisan question, this is a legitimate question. It would give us the power to turn down questions that have nothing to do with the census count. The bill will also increase transparency and support long-term planning by requiring the Bureau to submit its projected 5-year budget estimates to both the President and to Congress. And finally, the bill supports the critical role of advisory committees. Specifically, my bill codifies in law the existing Census Scientific Advisory Committee that has existed for years, the National Advisory Committee on Racial and Ethnic and Other Populations, and it would also establish a 2030 Census Advisory Committee, which already exists, and a Committee on Statistical Quality Standards. I am proud that my bill has the support of 4 former directors of the Census Bureau who served under administrations led by both Republicans and Democrats. These former directors have 15 years of experience serving as census directors supporting 5 decennial censuses. In a statement that commended the bill's objective to, quote, protect the independence and integrity of the scientific mission at the Census Bureau. These former directors concluded, and I quote, trust in the nation's official data is essential to democracy and the economy and to the future of our country. And this legislation will undergird that trust. I would like to put into the record an editorial of support from the Washington Post, and also the statement from Vincent Baraba, Kenneth Pruitt, John Thompson, and Robert Groves, 4 census directors that have served both Republicans and Democrats in their work. And lastly, I would like permission to place in Office of the Government and Public Affairs of the Association of Population Centers. I feel very strongly about this bill. I think it's essential for our democracy that our censuses be accurate and that it be away from manipulation. I have worked on this issue the entire time that I've been in Congress, and I passed it twice in the House, and it's never gotten through the Senate. And one of the things that this bill does, it is independent, but it's not that independent because it's under the Commerce Department. But what it does is that it ensures that questions that are added to the census have to be approved by both parties and professionals. They can't be manipulated or political, and it limits the number of political appointees. We actually added 1. It used to be 3. Under the former president went to 8. This would be 4 political appointees. The deputy would have to be a civil servant because you need someone there who actually knows how to get the job done with the professionals to get the job done, but it has a room for political appointees to be there, and but it limits the ability to manipulate it. I think it stops the ability to manipulate it by transparency and review by GAO and really the Congress itself for any drastic changes in the procedures of the census. With that, I respectfully yield back to the distinguished members of the Rules Committee and express how honored I am to be here to testify before you and to express to you my appreciation for the work that you do. I know many nights I'm home sleeping and you are here. I hear the reports, 4, 5, 6, maybe you don't even sleep. It's a very hard committee to be on. I know it's one of the most difficult. And I've been asked to get on it. I always shun it because I don't want to stay up all night. So I have tremendous respect for the work that you do. And as I said, you have the best artwork of any committee in Congress.
Well, thank you. We're honored to have you here. All the materials that you want to submit to the record without objection will be inserted in the record. Mr. Coleman, anything you want to insert in the record, you could do it, too. But we're honored to have you here. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Chairman McGovern and Ranking Member Cole. Americans continue to face sky-high inflation, painfully high gas prices, supply chain shortages, waves of illegal immigrants and fentanyl shipments flooding across our southern border, and a host of other urgent problems. Yet, what have the House Democrats prioritized to address during one of the last legislative weeks before November's congressional election? Chairwoman Maloney's Insuring a Fair and Accurate Census Act and Whistleblower Protection Improvement Act, as well as Representative Conley's Preventing a Patronage System Act. These bills have some important things in common. They're all about attacking the Trump administration, decisions and policies of the Trump administration. They have nothing to do with the American people's immediate needs. I oppose all three bills. Why? Let me begin with my dear friend Chairwoman Maloney's so-called Insuring a Fair and Accurate Census Act. This bill will not ensure a fair and accurate census. On the contrary, it will make it easier for the Census Bureau to conduct an unfair and inaccurate census. Indeed, it will make it easier for federal bureaucrats to generate census results that drive apportionment of congressional districts unfairly to favor blue Democrat-leaning states over red Republican-leaning states. Now, why is that? Because the bill, as reported by the committee, eliminates virtually all accountability of the Census Bureau to the United States President, the Secretary of Commerce, and even this democratically elected Congress, the voice of the people. It insulates the director of the Census Bureau from removal except for cause related to, quote, inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance in office, unquote. It then commits all operational, statistical, and technical decisions about the census to this unaccountable director. When the president, the secretary, or Congress are concerned that the director's decisions will yield an unfair or inaccurate census, it will be much harder to overrule them and replace the director. Now, I recognize that Chairwoman Maloney has offered a manager's amendment that would strike the bill's limitations on the director's removal. But the bill still statutorily commits all operational, statistical, and technical decisions about the census to the director. That simply makes it harder for the Commerce Secretary to step in and correct the director when his or her decisions would produce an unfair or inaccurate census. Making matters worse, the bill allows only an unaccountable career employee to serve as acting director when the Senate fails to confirm a director. Finally, the bill severely constrains the ability of future censuses to include important new questions such as the citizenship question. But it is precisely the counting of actual citizens that ensures census results will produce congressional districts fairly representing all citizens in Congress. Turning to Chairman Conley's Preventing a Patronage System Act, this bill would prevent future presidents from creating a new class of federal employees accepted from the cumbersome, competitive service and its heightened job protections. There are already 5 classes of accepted service employees. President Trump created a new class, the Schedule F class, through an executive order in October 2020. The order was a critical part of President Trump's efforts to make the D.C. bureaucracy accountable to the American people. The order made it easier to discipline or remove civil servants in policy-making roles who refused to implement a president's policy. Now, why is that important? Because when civil servants refuse to help implement presidential policies, they are ultimately refusing to implement the mandate the president has received from the American voters. The purpose of this bill is to make sure no president can ever again attempt what President Trump did. Why? Because House Democrats are beholden to the federal bureaucracy. They have made every effort to preserve the ability of bureaucrats to thwart the policies of any president who tries to implement policies to rein in the expansive influence of the federal government over the daily lives of Americans. This bill is contrary to the American way of government, of the people, by the people, and for the people. If you support an efficient and effective executive branch that is accountable to America's voters, then you must oppose H.R. 302. I urge the whole House to oppose this bill. Now, finally, I oppose my dear friend Chairwoman Maloney's so-called Whistleblower Protection Improvement Act. While I recognize that almost any bill with whistleblower and protection and improvement in its title might often sail through to becoming law, bills should be judged by what they do instead of their titles. And by the way, you all are very good at naming bills. I will give you credit for that. The bottom line is that whistleblowers in the government already have no shortage of protections from retaliation from their supervisors. At what point do we admit the obvious? Sometimes people will call themselves whistleblowers just to gain the protections Congress and the executive branch had already given them. At what point do we cross the line from simple repercussions to retaliation? Employees who seek to undermine or hinder an administration, whether Democrat or Republican, or who abuse their positions by engaging in improper or malicious conduct, or those who perform poorly should not be able to call themselves whistleblowers and be nearly impossible to fire. That's the way it works outside Washington, and it's time it starts working that way here too. But the bill before you would prohibit a mere investigation by an agency of an employee's participation in some misconduct or incident if the employee simply claims whistleblower status, and that's a problem. Whistleblowers play an important role in our government, and we must protect good faith whistleblowers facing unfairness, discrimination, or abuse. There are parts of this bill that Republicans can support, such as expanding existing whistleblower protections to apply to various parts of the government currently not covered. But as written, the bill relies too much on hoping members will see its title and instinctively vote yes. I encourage us to think more of a more nuanced approach to protect only those who deserve protecting. I oppose H.R. 8326, H.R. 302, and H.R. 2988, and urge my colleagues to do the same.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate your testimony. And without objection, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record statements of administration policy in support of H.R. 302, 2988, and 8326. Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, while I share the ranking member's opinion of these three bills, I want to take this moment to tell the chair how much I'm going to miss her in the next Congress. And I've seen you two work cooperatively together. I thought one of the most impressive pieces of legislation this Congress has passed was your bipartisan work of postal reform, which was really serious legislating, and to get that out of a committee that, by its nature, to be fair, is rather contentious, I thought just spoke very well of both of you. So thank you for that. Now, I'll turn my attention to these three pieces. Given the breadth of jurisdiction, and you guys have an enormous range of jurisdiction, I think, honestly, you're a much more powerful committee than most people recognize in the country. And again, I've seen instances where you two working together have done that very well to the benefit of the American people. It's unfortunate, in my view, these three bills are frankly, I think, not relevant, not necessary. I mean, H.R. 2988 already passed the House as part of a larger package. H.R. 302 is already in the House passed NDAA. And H.R. 8326, I honestly believe, is a bad solution in search of a non-existent problem. Mr. Comer, you suggested, I'm aware, I think, that you've sent a number of oversight letters and document preservation requests to federal agencies, drawing attention to what you regard as important issues that have gone ignored by the majority. Can you just give us an idea of some of the areas that you think we should be focusing on?
I don't know where to begin, but I will begin. That's a great question, and let me first say I share your praise for Chairwoman Maloney's service to not just the Oversight Committee, but the House of Representatives, and certainly going to miss working with her in the future. But, you know, Ranking Member Cole, as you know, we have tried to provide oversight. We have tried to provide accountability to this administration. We all agree that America's deeply divided, and it's been that way since Bush versus Gore. It's pretty much 50-50 right down the middle. And I understand there are instances where politics perhaps come into play in investigations. We certainly think that our good friend Mr. Raskins and Mr. Schiff have been very political in some of their investigations. But we've requested information that I think a majority of Americans, even more than the 50% that vote Republican, would want. We've requested information about decisions being made on the border that has left our border practically wide open. And the Republicans on the Oversight Committee have been down there on numerous occasions. We've had whistleblowers from Border Patrol approach us about concerns they have with policy that are, leading to more fentanyl and things like that. So we've requested a lot of information from Homeland Security, from Mayorkas. We haven't gotten anything back. We've been the leading committee from the minority standpoint on sincerely trying to get to the bottom of the origination of COVID-19. We've requested, dozens and dozens of letters from the CDC, from the NIH, from this administration. Haven't received anything back. Chairwoman Fox, or Ranking Member Fox from the Education, is also a good standing member on the House Oversight Committee. We've requested dozens and dozens of letters and information from the Department of Education. We have received absolutely nothing. We are also taking the investigation of Hunter Biden very seriously. And we believe that Hunter Biden is a national security risk. And we are concerned that the FBI hasn't done anything sooner with respect to Hunter Biden. Prior to Joe Biden becoming president, every member of Congress had access to suspicious activity reports from the Treasury Department. On the first day in office, or one of the first days in office, Joe Biden, by executive order, changed that to where Congress could not get that. Maxine Waters found this out and filed legislation to change it back, to give Congress. I support Maxine Waters. You won't get this very often. I support Maxine Waters' effort to give us, Congress, the authority back to request suspicious activity reports. Remember, these were put into place by George W. Bush after the September 11th attacks to try to track financial transactions coming from terrorist groups to fund terror activities in the United States. Under Bush, Obama, and Trump, any member of Congress, not just someone on the Oversight Committee, any member of Congress could request a suspicious activity report. Joe Biden changed that. I wonder why. Oh, is it because his son has 150 suspicious activity reports from at least 4 or 5 different banks? Unheard of, probably more than anyone in the United States of America. And I'm from a banking background. We've requested this information from Treasury. They will not give us this information. I could go on and on and on. We've requested information about spending, and it doesn't just deal with the Biden administration. I personally believe there was a lot of waste and mismanagement and fraud in the PPP loan program. I believe there was a lot of waste and mismanagement in the unemployment insurance program. That's been proven as well. That goes back to the last year of the Trump administration. So we're not just simply requesting oversight information on the Biden administration. We're going back, to the last administration as well. This administration is not providing Republicans with anything. Therefore, I don't think there's been a single cabinet secretary in the Biden administration testify before the House Oversight Committee. And if you go back to when Trump was president and the Democrats were in the majority, there were several cabinet secretaries. We had Wilbur Ross in front of the committee several times. It was painful having Wilbur Ross in front of the committee talking about the census. You remember, Mr. Raskin, and things like that. We had very high-level Trump administration officials in front of the Oversight Committee during the last 2 years of the Trump administration when the Republicans were in the majority. We haven't had that. So it's very frustrating where you have the minority on the Oversight Committee, the Republicans, sincerely trying to conduct oversight, not just oversight of the Biden administration, but oversight in programs that date back to the Trump administration. This administration is providing us with nothing. They have blocked us at every corner, at every turn, and I think the American people deserve to have a Congress that provides oversight and accountability because of the massive spending and because of the problems we have, the problems with inflation, the problems with fentanyl coming across the border. These are the things we've tried to get from this administration. And unfortunately, they're not working with us any, and I continue to call on my friends on the Oversight Committee and the majority to conduct meaningful oversight hearings of this administration, the excessive spending, and some of the policies that have led to higher gas prices, more inflation, more crime, poor public education as a result of COVID policies. The list goes on and on. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'll conclude with this. I just asked the question to give you an opportunity to make the point. There are a lot of things that we ought to be looking at. And some of those my friends on the other side will disagree with. That's fair enough. But there's some I bet you agree with. I mean, you mentioned specifically the suspicious activity reports and decisions there. That's actually something we lost as a tool, all of us in Congress that we had before. So I would hope, again, I understand there's always differences of opinion, and that's part of the nature of the process that we're in. But I would commend both of you. In the time you have left, you've had, I think, a very productive relationship, and you've produced really significant legislation. And I hope you can find some areas where you agree with one another, because I think when you do, you really have delivered for the American people, and I thank both of you for that. And with that, certainly yield to the chair, of
Point
course.
of personal privilege, I want to thank you for your very gracious comments, and I share the same feeling, and I really feel that the work that we did together was not easy. It was very difficult. It got so difficult that we instead of writing a bill, we started an agreement bill. We would decide on each issue, and if everyone agreed, it stayed in. If it didn't, it went out. And that's how we finally got a bill through after decades of people trying on one of the most important and beloved institutions in our country, that is the Postal Service. But my point of personal privilege is that I would like an opportunity to place in the record the number of administration officials that appeared before our committee, starting with Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci, the first committee that he testified before was our committee on the crisis of COVID and others, and other important work that we have done to protect the American people with greater safety, protection of their rights, reunification of families at the border, and many other things that we worked on in a joint way that I would like permission to put into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Well, thank both of you again, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to refrain from responding, Mr. Comer, to you, because, I mean, the notion that the previous administration is an example of transparency or openness, or an administration that somehow had respect for the law or the truth is something I just can't put my head around. And especially now, even as he has left the White House, what is happening right now is really a national disgrace. But in any event, I will hold back. Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here today. I also want to say, how much I've appreciated your leadership in not just in this committee, but throughout the time that I have served here with you. And we'll have a longer conversation later, I know. Right now, I want to focus on the bills that you have presented. That was such a wonderful presentation, and it's really deep-rooted into the many years that you have spent here working for the people. Public corruption is something that all of us should be very, very concerned about. Public corruption is the type of crime that isn't discovered immediately. And usually, by the time it is discovered, the statute of limitations has long passed. So the people that end up continuing to pay the freight for this public corruption, is the taxpayers. It's the people that pay, hard-earned dollars into the federal government for programs that they need in their community. to fund, the different programs that we have. In the last administration, it was alarming, the amount of pay to play. You either paid with campaign contributions, or you paid by retaliating against people that campaign against that administration, or you paid by a favor, or you paid by, hiring this person or that person. And that is unfortunate. And I think that through this process that you have of these bills that you have before us, you have really tried to address some of those major concerns. Public servants are not just bureaucrats. And bureaucrats is not, we all, me included, we use it very loosely, and they're not the enemy of the people. They are the guardians that are here whether we are here or not, even long after we leave. And yes, sometimes, those public servants are supposed to be public servants and, fall to, in bad light, just like, elected officials do. And when that happens, we want to make sure that we empower people to come forward and to be able to provide timely information so that we do not allow for the clock to run out. My only regret in this bill is that we do not extend that clock to the time when the crime was discovered when it comes to public corruption. But I am very supportive of your bills. Thank you again for your many years of leadership in the House, the People's House, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady for her comments and would like to just point out one of the criticisms my dear colleague, Mr. Comer, had is that bad whistleblowers will get away with murder using, claiming things that aren't true. The bill doesn't protect them. The bill looks at what the information is, and if it's not accurate or if the other person is causing problems, it will not listen to that person. So I just wanted to mention that that is part of the bill, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Reschenthaler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Comer, do you have any response?
Yeah. I don't think there's anything wrong with the whistleblower laws now. And if anything, they could be expanded. I said that in the one part of praise I had for the bill, but it does protect bad whistleblowers. So we have a good whistleblower system now. In fact, I can tell you with confidence, there are a lot of whistleblowers coming forward now from agencies like the FBI and Border Patrol that are meeting with various minority members of very important committees now. So I think our whistleblower laws are fine. I don't think we need to do anything but expand them to other areas. But again, just because someone claims they're a whistleblower doesn't mean they should be shielded from their accuser. And that's one of the biggest problems too. If they don't have to face their accuser. So this is something that I think isn't needed. I do think we've got a good whistleblower law now, and I don't think it needs to be changed. And you're going to see a lot. If things go the way I hope they go in November, I think you're going to see a lot of whistleblowers in January, February, and March. I yield back.
Thank you. I yield back as well.
Mr. Perlmutter.
Thanks, and I'll add my thanks to Ms. Maloney for all the service, and particularly service to financial services, where I've served on the committee with her for 16 years now, and just thank you for that. I guess these bills just seem like no-brainers to me, Mr. Comer, and I actually said to my staff walking over here, why aren't these on suspension? Because I assumed that they would be so simple and direct that everybody was going to agree to them. And I've listened to all of the complaints, Mr. Comer, that you've raised against the Patronage System Act of 2021. The whistleblower, what we have is good enough.
ensuring a fair and accurate census. Now, you did admit that they're good titles, and they are good titles, and they represent what's in the bills. And I think that these advance the law. So, Ms. Maloney, I don't know if you want to comment on that. Otherwise, I'm going to yield back, because these are simple to me, and I'm going to support them.
I would like a permission to place in the record a clarifications of why we need the Whistleblower Protection Act and why there are over 100 organizations, bipartisan, that have written in support of this bill. And one of the problems is that there is a tremendous backlog in protecting them. And the agency that oversees it, they don't even have a quorum. They haven't had a quorum in 6 years. So there's certain things that are not working. And oftentimes, whistleblowers are punished terribly. I just gave one example of where they talked about something that they thought was a national security risk for people going on planes. We all know the danger. I represent several airports, and they tell me they're still trying. They still catch people trying to get on planes with knives and other weapons and things to hurt Americans. So it's a very serious job, a TSA employee. And that one that came forward seeing some weaknesses in the system was punished and sent hundreds of miles away where he wasn't even near his family. So we really do have to protect people who really risk their careers because they're loyal patriots telling us how to make our country stronger. We should protect them, not punish them. And when we have a system that's not working, and this system is not working now, look at how so many whistleblowers have been ceremonially fired and pushed out of their jobs. Anyway, I yield back. I'd like permission to place in written documentation in that area. Thank you.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Ms. Fishbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just kind of want to make some comments on HR 302 because I really am concerned. We need to make sure that we have more transparency, that the entrenched bureaucrats are responsive, and I think this is what the American people don't want to happen. They want to know what's going on in those departments, and they've obviously become less and less responsive to the American people, and I think this is going the wrong direction. They need to be responsive to the administration, to elected officials, and we've seen that diminish as we provide more and more of these kinds of protections that allow them not to respond, to not do what the American people want, the elected officials who are elected to represent them are trying to get done. And so I think this is as we build the government, we need to make sure that we are not doing that. And I think that Mr. Comer has some.
I agree completely, and this is probably one of the biggest policy differences among the Republicans and Democrats on the Oversight Committee. We believe that it is far too difficult to terminate poor performers in the federal government, and that was the objective of the whole Schedule F program that President Trump proposed. And I think if you polled that or had a referendum across America, that overwhelming majority of Americans would support that. So obviously we oppose further protections for poor performing federal employees.
And I think that it's almost become the running joke, or the issue of, well, just wait a few years and someone will, we'll still be here, and their term of office will run out, and so they stonewall things like that.
Another issue that we've had with respect to the federal workforce is there's still a lot of employees that are working from home in the name of COVID. And you have federal agencies that have just ridiculous backlogs like the VA. And, if you try to, we all have casework dealing with passports and things like that. So there are a lot of issues with the federal workforce. The overwhelming majority of federal employees are outstanding, but there are bad actors, just like there are bad actors in politics, there are bad actors in preaching, there are bad actors in the medical field. And they need to be held accountable, and it makes it very difficult with the civil service program to terminate the small handful of poor performers. Yield back.
And I think that is something that we hear a lot about, hear from our constituents about accountability and transparency, and this does neither. If Mr. Comer has nothing else to add, I will yield back.
Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Comer, welcome. And Ms. Maloney, I want to welcome you back and thank you also for your many, many years of passionate service to the Oversight Committee and to the House of Representatives. And you've been a great leader on so many issues, including the census, where you have long advocated for an efficient and comprehensive census and one that is immune from political manipulation, and for the civil service. And you've also fought for a civil service that is insulated from political and partisan machinations, and also for whistleblowers. And so this is a fitting day because you bring 3 bills to us that are all about defending public integrity. And the civil service was created at the end of the 19th century to keep public offices from being used as instruments of political party favors and partisan self-entrenchment. There are places in America, including in New York, I believe, on Long Island, where people who were appointed to public office had to give 1 or 2% of their salary to the political party as a kickback. The whole purpose of the civil service is to insulate the government from becoming an instrument of political party favor and political party organizing and activity, so that public servants do the public's work and don't do the work of political parties. So the 302 is essential legislation. It seems to me that 2988, protecting whistleblowers and strengthening the protections that exist, are also about creating a check against the idea that the people who get into government office can use it as an instrument of private gain or political party manipulation. And of course, the Census Act is anchored in the Constitution itself, because to have a government that's based on the consent of the governed, we have to know who the people are and who's here. So I wonder, if you have reflections generally about the importance of the kind of legislation we're doing, and am I reading them right, that these are all about protecting public accountability?
It's all about protecting our democracy and our people and accountability. And I just want to say that the federal government now can and does remove people for poor performance when it is appropriate. According to data from the Office of Personnel and Management, the federal government removed 10,687 employees in fiscal year 2021.
In fact, if I could interrupt for a second, wasn't that the whole purpose of the civil service?
Absolutely.
That when people were party appointees and party actors, you could never get rid of them as long as they remained party loyalists. But the civil service, for the first time, instituted real regulations and rules so that people who were dysfunctional or incompetent could be removed.
And I would also add that Schedule F was never about removing employees who were performing poorly. That was not the purpose of Schedule F. It aimed to strip workplace protections away from federal employees so that anyone who didn't adhere to an ideology aligned with the president could easily be replaced with someone who did. And as the congressman pointed out, Mr. Raskin, the civil service was supposed to be there for the people, not for any political party getting the job done for the government, for the people of America. So Schedule F was really very frightening to anyone who supported the civil service program of having a nonpartisan group of federal employees who work for the people directly, not for a political party.
Well, I appreciate that, and I would just add finally that one thing that we saw in the last administration was this clear blurring of boundaries between what was official governmental and what was political. We saw the White House being used as a political prop, as a place where campaign events were taking place. We saw the White House Chief of Staff involved in the president's political campaign, and just a complete mixture of official governmental responsibilities under law with partisan campaign responsibility. So I'm glad that you're bringing these bills forward, and I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you, Chairman McGovern. Chairwoman Maloney, thank you for bringing these three important bills here. I'm not going to laud you now. You're going to be with us for several months and certainly have a lot of important work to do, even as we see Mr. Graham introducing some interesting legislation across the way. These bills are really important to rebuild the guardrails of good government in the wake of the abuses we saw in the last administration. They strengthen congressional and public oversight and protect against future attempts to politicize the federal civil service and the census. And they do so at a time when it's particularly important to strengthen those guardrails with legislation, because we have one party that's demonstrated reluctance to hold an executive accountable for misconduct. I'm really proud of the work that the House has done so far to clean up the chaos created by the former administration and prevent future presidents from abusing the powers of the executive. And some examples of that work would be the Protecting Our Democracy Act and the IG Independence and Empowerment Act. So two of these bills would protect civil servants, hardworking Americans who commit their careers to serving the American people rather than pledging loyalty to any one man or party. And it would protect them from political attacks and retaliation. The Preventing a Patronage System Act is of particular interest because we've seen a lot of reporting over the last couple months that the disgraced former president and his allies plan to use the Schedule F, which is at issue in this bill, and other abuses of civil service to fire tens of thousands of public employees in the future and undermine the federal government and rule of law should Mr. Trump or his allies come into power again. And these allies include Jeffrey Clark, who has discussed plans to use this patronage system to make another attempt to seize control of the Justice Department. And other allies who have been discussing these plans include Stephen Miller, Kash Patel, and others who've proven themselves unfit to put the interests of the American people above their own political ambition. So the other bill would prevent future presidents from meddling in the operation of the decennial census. And in 2020, we saw unprecedented efforts by the former administration to politicize that constitutional function of counting the American people. So regardless of the party in power, these bills also support Congress's bipartisan interest in protecting its Article I powers from an ever-expanding and sometimes unaccountable executive. So I'm going to strongly support the package. I did want to ask you one question, Chairwoman Maloney. There's been a suggestion that the Preventing a Patronage System Act is problematic because it prevents a president from creating a new class of civil service employees. But in fact, if a president wanted to create a new class of civil service employees, he or she could convince Congress that it was a good idea, right? I mean, this doesn't say it could never
Well,
happen.
actually, I think it's a very good question. You can create, but it has to be approved by Congress.
Right.
Or disapproved by Congress. And I think that the Schedule F is not necessary, and we can remove people for poor performance. As I said, tens of thousands have been removed, and we certainly should not turn the civil service program into a patronage system again. We worked hard to make it a professional system. It's a very good system, and I'm proud of the work that people in our state government and in our country do for Republican administrations and Democratic administrations. I do want to say something about the census bill. It really should be bipartisan. And I want to point out that the manipulation was so outrageous that a Democratic lawsuit protesting went to the Supreme Court, and we won in what some people call a partisan Supreme Court with the nominations from Mr. Trump. The Republicans that far outnumber the Democrats. But when this suit was brought to the Supreme Court, that the citizenship question was unfair, was manipulated, was political gain, not for an accurate census, would hurt the census. We literally won at the Supreme Court. I will tell you, quite frankly, I was shocked. I didn't think we would win. I thought that the Supreme Court would be partisan and rule against us. But we won in the Supreme Court based on the really terrible manipulation of the census. And again, I point out that when the census is not accurate, it not only hurts, it hurts everyone. Most importantly, it hurts our future because our data is not correct. We don't really have the accurate information. We should always be working to have the most accurate and fair census possible for the own strength of our country. Our economy is based on it. Our national security is based on it. Our representation is based on it. It is so fundamental, it's in our Constitution. And when I look at these bills, I agree with the statement of Ms. Scanlon, Ms. Raskin, Mr. Perlmutter, and Ms. Torres, who said these should be bipartisan. They're really about a fair and accurate democracy. And I yield back, and I thank you for your comments, Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you. I'll yield back.
I think Mr. Comer wanted to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just believe that the Schedule F, the rationale behind it has been mischaracterized. I'm going to give you two examples of why President Trump proposed the Schedule F. So if you have a president that comes in and says they want to reduce rules and regulations, whether it be in the Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Ag, pertaining to something like H-2A workers, if you're a farmer, you have to deal with all this paperwork and compliance. There's a way to simplify that. Let's say the president wants to do that, but the bureaucrats in the Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Ag, or whichever government agency you're dealing with, State Department, say, no, we like it the way it is. It's very frustrating for a president to try to enact the policies that they were elected to serve the people in. Another example is increased drilling permits. You know, if gas prices go to $4 or $5 a gallon and the president says, all right, we've got to drill more oil. We're going to make it easier to get drilling permits. I campaigned on that. I want to make it easier to drill. But then the EPA or the different various agencies say, no, we don't want to do that, which I think is what's happening now. Then it makes it very difficult for a president to implement the policies when you have a bureaucracy that fights back and opposes him every step of the way. And that was the reason for the Schedule F, not for political reasons, or for the president to be able to implement the policies that he or she was elected president on. I yield back.
Thank you.
Chairman McGovern, I just wanted to seek unanimous consent to introduce an article by Jonathan Swan dated July 22nd, 2022, entitled "A Radical Plan for Trump's Second Term."
Without objection. Mr. Morelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's always great to see my colleague and friend from New York. Appreciate her leadership. I'm sorry to learn that you shunned our committee. Usually we hear that about Mr. Perlmutter, not the whole committee. This is quite a revelation to me. But as it relates to the bills before us, particularly around the patronage bill, I appreciate what Mr. Comer said about presidents, I'm sure, being frustrated at times about the bureaucracy. But the civil service has been around since the latter part of the 19th century, and I'm sure Democrats and Republicans have had frustrations, but none have taken the extraordinary steps that have been taken by the president, the previous president. And I just say, you know, when I have conversations with people back home, they ask about things like this. Why is this necessary to do these things which seem like common sense? And I think it really relates back to the fact that literally all the norms and standards which we have come to rely on, I think as Americans for decades, were undermined or attempted to be outright eliminated by the prior administration. And it pains me to say it, but it's not just civil service, it's around election results, it's around the transfer of power in the United States, it's about women's rights, it's about classified materials. And I think the fear is that we now have to be incredibly explicit about installing those standards and norms which had come to be accepted by millions of Americans over generations. And I think it's hard to argue against that. And that stands for Democrats and Republicans over not just decades, but the centuries. And that's what I think is so troubling about what we need. I will certainly support the rule and the bill. I just think it's sad that we're in a position where we have to do it. But I think that when you boil it down, it's really this erosion of the standards and norms of just about everything that we came to believe. And I often say to people, I took as an article of faith certain things about our democracy which you can no longer be assured are going to be in place. And I think many Democrats and Republicans around this country, and those who've witnessed American government over the decades, are aghast. Some are saying it more publicly than others, but it always seems to come back to the same place. And I find that troubling, and I think it's unfortunate we have to pass bills like this. And it's hard to imagine that civil service, which dates back to the 1880s, that we now have to defend it once again, and not because of some steady drumbeat over the decades of the need for reform, but it's really the erosion of the norms and standards under the previous administration. So I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Burgess, do you have any questions? I know you have an amendment you want to talk about, but we're going to do that after this. So if you have questions of the panel. Okay, all right, okay. Ms. Ross?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair. I was about to praise Madam Chair for her leadership, not just on these bills, but also in her chairwomanship and as a leader and a mentor, particularly to women who come to this Congress. And she's been a mentor to me, and I'm just thrilled to be able to support her bills. In particular, the bill on the fair and accurate census is so important, particularly to my district. 62 people a day move into my district, and they come from all over North Carolina, all over the country, and all over the world. And I certainly want to know who they are and why they've come to Wake County, North Carolina. And it is so important that we count every single one of them and we provide them with the representation that they deserve because they're so proud to be in our country. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and I support the rule and the underlying bills.
Thank you very much. I think there are no other questions of this panel. I want to thank you both for being here, and thank you. I mean, this will not be your last appearance before the Rules Committee, so we're a lot more work to do before the year is out, but you're free to go. And without objection, I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a statement from Representative Sheila Jackson-Lee on her amendments to H.R. 2988 and H.R. 8326. Now we will hear from Dr. Burgess. Okay, so let's talk amongst ourselves. Are there any other members who wish to testify in H.R. 302, H.R. 2988, or H.R. 8326? We want to. All right. So seeing none, that closes the hearing on H.R. 302, H.R. 2988, and H.R. 8326. At this point, the chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Settle in, everyone. This will take a little bit. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 302, the Preventing a Patronage System Act, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Reform or their designees. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Oversight and Reform, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes in order only the further amendment to H.R. 302 printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report. The amendment may be offered only by the member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment printed in Part A of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule also provides for consideration of H.R. 2988, the Whistleblower Protection Improvement Act, under a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Reform or their designees. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Oversight and Reform, now printed in the bill as modified by the amendment printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes in order only those further amendments printed in Part C of the Rules Committee report and amendments on block described in Section 4 of the resolution. Each amendment printed in the report may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for a division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part C of the report or amendments in block described in Section 4 of the resolution. Section 4 provides that the chair of the Committee on Oversight and Reform or her designee may offer amendments on block consisting of amendments printed in Part C of the Rules Committee report not earlier disposed of. Amendments on block shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for 20 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Reform, or their designees, shall not be subject to amendment and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule provides that at the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill as amended to the House with such further amendments as may have been adopted. The question of such further amendments adoption shall be put to the House on gross and without division of the question. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule provides that during consideration of H.R. 2988, the chair may entertain a motion that the committee rise only if offered by the chair of the Committee on Oversight and Reform or her designee. The chair may not entertain a motion to strike out the enacting words of the bill. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 8326, the Insuring a Fair and Accurate Census Act, under a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Reform or their designees. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 117-64 modified by the amendment printed in Part D of the Rules Committee report shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes in order only those further amendments printed in Part E of the Rules Committee report and amendments on block described in Section 8 of the resolution. Each amendment printed in the report may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part E of the report or amendments on block described in Section 8 of the resolution. Section 8 provides that the chair of the Committee on Oversight and Reform or her designee may offer amendments en bloc consisting of amendments printed in Part E of the Rules Committee report not earlier disposed of. Amendments en bloc shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for 20 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Reform or their designees, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule provides that at the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill as amended to the House with such further amendments as may have been adopted. The question of such further amendments adoption shall be put to the House on gross and without division of the question. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule provides that during consideration of H.R. 8326, the chair may entertain a motion that the committee rise only if offered by the chair of the Committee on Oversight and Reform or her designee. The chair may not entertain a motion to strike out the enacting words of the bill. The rule provides that at any time through the legislative day of September 16, 2022, the Speaker may entertain motions offered by the Majority Leader or a designee that the House suspend the rules with respect to multiple measures that were the object of motions to suspend the rules on the legislative day of September 13, September 14, September 15, or September 16, on which the yeas and nays were ordered and further proceedings postponed. The chair shall put the question on any such motion without debate or intervening motion, and the ordering of the yeas and nays on postponed motions to suspend the rules with respect to such measures is vacated. Finally, The rule waives the requirement of Clause 6A of Rule 13 for a two-thirds vote to consider a report from the Committee on Rules on the same day it is presented to the House with respect to any resolution reported through the legislative day of September 30th, 2022, relating to a measure making or continuing appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30, 2023. I move the motion.
You heard the motion from the gentleman from Maryland. Are there any discussion or amendments? Why don't I turn to Mr. Burgess first?
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I do have an amendment to 8326. This amendment would strike the language in 8326, which allows the president to replace the director of the United States Census Bureau only for inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance in office. In June of 2020, the Supreme Court ruled in Scalia Law versus the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that restrictions on the removal of the CFPB director by Congress violated the Constitution's separation of powers. And this very similar language, which restricts a president's ability to remove the director of the United States Census Bureau, could be ruled equally unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. This amendment would remove the unconstitutional provision from the underlying bill. This amendment would ensure that the president is able to hold accountable the director of the Census Bureau for any reasons impacting the census's fairness and accuracy, and I urge this amendment to be made in order.
Yes. All right. Yeah, so as you may know, that lines 16 through 18 are going to be taken out of the bill in the manager's amendment. I don't know, I got to reconsider now. Right. So, but anyway, but thank you.
It was a great idea.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any amendments or any other discussion? If not, the vote occurs on the motion from the gentleman from Maryland. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Recorded vote has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Torres. Aye. Mrs. Torres, aye. Mr. Perlmutter. Aye. Mr. Perlmutter, aye. Mr. Raskin.
Aye.
Mr. Raskin, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Morelli.
Aye.
Mr. Morelli, aye. Mr. DeSaulnier.
Aye.
Mr. DeSaulnier, aye. Ms. Ross. Aye. Ms. Ross, aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk report the total.
8 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Mr. Raskin will handle it for the majority.
And the famous alligator killer, Mr. Reschenthaler, will handle it for the Republic.
And so that concludes the business. So without objection, the committee is adjourned.